Artificial intelligence, AI, as a technology that enables machines, particularly computers, to simulate human intelligence, AI continues to rapidly evolve and is becoming increasingly capable of problem solving and other tasks. Where is AI today, and what does it mean to the food industry? I'm your TAG Talks host, Lisa Lupo, and a year ago we spoke with TAG Executive Vice President of Regulatory and Scientific Affairs, Dr. Ben Miller, on the then current status of AI. So we've now invited him back to discuss where we are today and what the year has seen in the evolution of AI. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Lisa. Good to be with you.
So, how have you seen the general field of AI advance or simply change over the last year?
Yeah, great question. I think if anybody's been kind of keeping track of where we were a year ago versus where we are now, relative to a lot of the products that are out there, and when we talk about products and thinking a lot about kind of the large language models, things like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and Claude. So a lot of these AI chatbots, have really progressed in terms of their capabilities. And I think, in terms of just the number of people that have had a chance to use and interact with some of these systems. And so, I think those are kind of the headline systems when we think about AI. You've also seen kind of AI proliferate everywhere, starting to be embedded into a lot of the productivity tools, software, like Microsoft Word and things like that, that people use on a regular basis. So we're seeing just a broader exposure, I think, within the workplace and then the general public. So gaining a literacy, at least in terms of the fact that these things exist and in terms of really what they're capable of. I mean, the progression from when ChatGPT 3 was released back in December of 2022 to the point where we are now. I mean, the capabilities of those systems have really taken off. I think when we think specifically in terms of food safety applications, we're seeing a progression, but maybe not quite at the same scale in terms of uptake and just the capability development. I know we can talk about that in a little more detail here.
Okay. Well, again, just in more of a general discussion, what do you see as some of the pros and cons of AI, especially now that it, has had that change in the last year?
Yeah, I think, obviously the idea that, people can augment a lot of sort of manual tasks, things that we would have typically, had to spend a lot of time doing, we can delegate to some of these systems now, certainly in terms of writing and even, web search. We've got some web search capabilities using AI systems that are fairly accurate. I mean, there's still concern about the accuracy of these systems overall, but really a lot of the potential, I think, in the short term lies in automating processes that are, highly routine processes for the food industry. So when we think about things like foreign material detection or temperature monitoring, and automatic notifications, things that maybe aren't quite as exciting as sort of those chatbot models, but that nonetheless sort of bring a consistency to process that has sometimes relied on just sort of people doing manual work. I think about preventive controls and critical control points, things that can be reliably automated because the sort of system that they exist within is fairly defined, and we've got a pretty standardized set of data. So I think we're going to continue to see uptake in that space and the introduction of some predictive analytics into some of those systems. So one simple example that I think people can think about and wrap their heads around is, if you look at temperature control systems, when the system starts to detect sort of regular patterns of deviation in those systems, that might be indicative of a maintenance issue. And so, you can prevent a problem before it happens, if you will. If there's a compressor in a system that seems to be failing and the system can pick that up and detect it ahead of time, you can circumvent the loss of temperature control, in a manufactured or retail food environment. So we're starting to see some of those concepts emerge and as part of service offerings. So again, not necessarily as exciting as some of the progress we've seen in the chatbot space, but we're going to continue to see that introduction of predictive analytics as we start to systematize a lot of this electronic data collection.
Yeah, along the similar lines of that, in the food industry, one of the areas that you did mention last June was FDA's use of AI large data sets as part of its import program to identify the more violative or higher risk imports. Can you discuss this, and any other FDA, USDA uses you've seen?
Yeah, it's, and FDA has continued to kind of part of your new area of smarter food safety has really kind of leaned in. I think, that's a good example of the use of that application. So they started data collection, I think, piloting that back in 2018 and have, collected the data and then used it to identify shipments of, particular types of seafood that might be more likely to be violative, based on a number of different criteria that are collected in their import data system. And I think they've had good success with that. Another initiative is kind of this Western Grower Association initiative, which is a voluntary initiative in the industry and asking growers in certain regions of the southwestern part of the United States to voluntarily share data and information about field testing and other variables that then you can combine with sort of meteorological data to predict when a contamination event in a growing field might be more likely to happen, or when it's more likely that you're going to get a positive during, say, your routine harvest sampling activities. So we are starting to see more instances of kind of that predictive analytics moving into some of these spaces. Another example is, and this one's actually a little bit older, but an interesting one nonetheless, is that the city of Chicago, had worked with some data researchers to look at, could they predict for the retail food inspection activities that they were doing, when a firm was more likely to have critical violations or sort of repeat critical violations. And they took a number of different sort of non-traditional variables, non-traditional food safety variables into account, combining data from their city complaint system and things like that. And it turned out that, some factors like if there had been recent garbage complaints in the area and things like that could be more predictive of where there would be critical violations within the food establishment. So, we, again, some small examples, and I think we'll continue to see more of those proliferate as some of these things, I think, similar to what we've seen in kind of the chatbot space, that some of these things get integrated more into traditional software platforms. We'll probably see more of this uptake. So it's less of a standalone system and then something that's really kind of integrated into other existing systems like electronic inspection systems and things like that. So still early days.
Yeah.
For the food industry, a lot of it really relies on having enough high quality data to also train some of these systems on, which is important. The thing that's made chatbots so successful is they've basically ingested all of the material that on the internet. So there's a lot out there, and looking at sort of how much material there is. We don't necessarily have that amount of data within specific applications from the food side. So these systems tend to have to be a little more purpose built, or what we call narrowly focused or weak AI systems, that are solving a particular problem for a particular use case.
Okay. So one area in the industry that there has been kind of gradually more data collection is for traceability, to try to comply with the traceability rule. So is AI applicable for traceability? Has anything been done or realized there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it could be, I think a lot depends on, within a company or within, FDA in terms of the data that they may collect once the rule becomes effective in 2026. I know, again, the agency is considering what analytical tools they could bring to doing or speeding up some of those traceback investigations. And certainly kind of a purpose-built AI system could, help FDA look at and figure out the potential source of an outbreak more quickly. What that specific system looks like or how it's designed, I think is, kind of in the works or yet to be determined. But Certainly the data will exist in a way that it hasn't before in terms of structured critical tracking events and key data elements. So, again, a lot of this depends on what's the quality of the data going into a system to sort of get to a quality output. We talk about AI, like that's always been true in data analysis, and that hasn't necessarily changed with AI, so quality in, quality out. But that's definitely a space that we'll want to continue to watch.
So you obviously and TAG have been tracking AI to potentially help clients identify ways that they can think proactively about data structure to help prepare them for potential AI applications. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think we've been kind of working on thinking about just ways to structure people's approach to, is AI really a good solution for a problem that they may have? And so really a part of it starts with defining what the business problem is. So, is this a problem that would be suited for an AI solution? And then next is starting to think about what's the sort of data acumen or kind of capacity within the company itself. So do you collect that data electronically right now? Like, are you making data-based decisions today? So how comfortable are people in terms of using the data that's collected to drive some of that decision-making process? And then I think the third kind of key piece of this assessment framework that we're working on is to think about what's sort of the food safety maturity or agility within the company. We want to start from we think a company needs to start from a strong foundation of kind of food safety culture, food safety agility when thinking about, yes, I collect this information, I've got the potential to analyze it in a unique or novel way, but do I fundamentally have sound food safety systems in place already, that I can then just implement based on either predictive analytics or suggestions from a system that might drive, human-based decision making. So kind of we go back to that three-legged stool, that we talk about in terms of food safety or environmental health or whatever discipline you're coming from. So it's kind of a business problem, data infrastructure, and then kind of food safety infrastructure. So, as clients think about an approach or if there's a good potential AI solution for them, it's walking them through that decision-making framework that can help sort of identify gaps. And then if there are gaps, or what should they think about in terms of closing or addressing those?
Okay. Yeah, and kind of along those lines, a caution that you did pose last year was that it's really wise to use AI cautiously. So do you still see this as still being true or even more or less necessary?
Yeah, I think it's, the technology certainly didn't go back to the large language models has matured pretty significantly. That still doesn't mean that it gets it right 100% of the time. And so, I think when we think about food safety applications or really any application, especially when you're talking about scientific or regulatory questions, those are great tools for a brainstorming or kind of outlining approach to things. But it's always, we're still in a very much, in my opinion, kind of a trust but verify space. So if you're going to use these tools, double check the output that comes out of it, either through kind of your own research or going to the peer-reviewed literature or checking the regulation or, consulting another subject matter expert. I think, again, we're starting to see these tools get a lot better, particularly in those spaces, but not necessarily to the point where they're 100% correct all the time. And you wouldn't want to make, kind of a key food safety decision based on the output from, a large language model or even one that's designed from like an internet search standpoint. So we aren't yet to the point where it's replaced subject matter expertise. I think you look at developing purpose-built food safety applications, it very much depends, again, going back to like, what's the quality of data that you have? What's the question you're trying to ask? So that really needs to be kind of broken down and thought about in a stepwise fashion, for that particular application. And then, right, what's your comfort with kind of making a decision based on the output of that system? But it can be similar to the way that we think about preventive controls, right? We can validate and verify, some
Right.
systems once they're identified or once they've been developed. So.
It also seems that the ethical questions around AI continue to build and many nations are proposing or passing AI regulations. So how does this impact the food industry or just in general? What do you see happening there?
I think it very much depends again, sort of on the problem you're trying to solve. But, I think it's important depending on, again, sort of the use case to understand the quality of the data source that you have. One of the concerns when you train these systems is, are the data biased in some way, so that the system's not going to know that the data that it's being fed and trained on is biased, but it might be. So when we think about something like restaurant complaints, for example, so if you're a company or a jurisdiction, let's say you're a regulatory jurisdiction that's going to look at restaurant complaints to drive your inspection programs, is there some inherent bias in terms of the type of restaurants that might receive more complaints versus another type? And so you have to sort of start to factor that into understanding the recommendations that may come out of those systems as well. I mean, it's just a simple overall example to think about, but I think, understanding really the data, how it's collected, what are some of the potential shortcomings or pitfalls within that particular data set's going to be important in terms of, specific food safety applications. I'm probably a little less concerned about like misinformation necessarily in the food safety space. Certainly when we look at other sectors, like politics or, kind of other public health sectors where misinformation has been an issue in the past. I mean, I think that is a genuine concern in terms of the ability of some of these tools to, generate a high volume of credible sounding information that's just not true. But, we haven't really seen that concern emerge, at least today, hopefully, knock on wood, in the food safety. So.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of areas of AI in this discussion. What overall would you want our listeners to remember as the key takeaways from this discussion?
Yeah, I think, the important thing to know is that this is a field that's going to continue to develop, and I think it will become more and more integrated into, the work that we do. I think it's important that people have a foundational understanding of what AI is and what it isn't, and, how to approach it in, hopefully a way that's responsible and helps people solve the problem that they're trying to solve. It is not a magic wand. Sometimes I think it's presented in that way. And it's not the case. It's a technology, it's a tool. So the best thing that people can do is spend some time getting familiar with what it can do and what it can't do and what you should use it for and maybe what you shouldn't use it for, just like anything. So, but I do believe that, we're going to see it continue to be integrated into new and existing systems at a relatively, quick pace. So it's good to have that literacy.
I want to thank you, Ben, for illuminating our audience here on AI and where it stands both within the industry and just in general. And thank our audience, as always, for listening in. Be sure to let us know if there's any topics that you'd like us to focus on in our TAG Talks. Put them down in the comments and be sure and listen and click to our videos to stay up to date on all things food safety and public health. Thanks again, Ben.